Greetings, dear friends, guests, subscribers to my channel, to Alexey's channels. This is our first stream of 2026, and the first stream on my channel, the first stream on Alexey's channel on this 2026 year. So Happy New Year. Yeah, Happy New Year. Hopefully it'll be one that brings some luck and joy to people. All right, so the events are unfolding. Significant events. Maduro is already being presented at the court in New York, at the judge rather in New York, and he's saying he's president who's been kidnapped. So it's interesting to observe this specific event and discuss it, whether the international law was used properly or was pretty much used and dumped the way the strong party sees fit. So there'll be a lot of geopolitics today, and of course we'll talk about the specific events in Ukraine. Thank you very much for following our meetings, our streams. You can see 2 QR codes at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to follow them. New seminars, courses at Alexey's school, and the QR code next to Alexander. These are ways to ask questions and make donations. And of course, thanks from Privateer Station translating all these materials. If you guys want to subscribe, click the bell button. That actually helps us to continue, stay alive. And yeah, we appreciate you being here. All right, so we will also have Q&A, the usual, but the beginning of the show, we have a usual question with optional answers. Capture of Maduro and extradition to the United States is option 1. It's a show and agreed upon set of events with Maduro. Second option, it's all about oil and treachery in Caracas, that he was there was a treason and somebody basically let him sail down the river. And the third option is whether it is perhaps a special military operation by Trump and his hemisphere, or it is the bottom and the burial moment for the international law. So these are 4 options. They're not mutually exclusive, but please try to pick the one that you think is closest to reality. Alexey, what would you pick here? Oh, I would have picked the last one. It's everything together. The moment that really concerns us down in Ukraine is whether Venezuela operation is an exchange of Venezuela for Ukraine, basically. That Russia was given Ukraine and the United States took Venezuela. It's a different angle, though. When Putin said, I'm going to show EU and America that they're not allowed next to our borders and invaded Ukraine, same thing is what America is doing. They're showing to China, to Russia, and the rest that we will not tolerate your influence next to our interests. So, and I'm quite sure that in the months to follow, there likely will be more surprises. Perhaps Cuba, Greenland, Colombia. Interesting things may happen in Mexico as well. Because American administration, Trump administration, issued or revived the doctrine of national security, and they started to realize that. And they're realizing it full steam ahead, and their task is to cleanse their hemisphere from Russian and Chinese influence, become the leading power there without any questions, and this is return to Monroe Doctrine from the politics of Wilson from the First World War, until which they were following Monroe Doctrine, and then they decided to take a military trip to Europe and participate in the First World War, and that led to Versailles peace, that peace accords of the First World War that put Germany in a position to start the Second World War. So today we are seeing America, witnessing America using the Monroe Doctrine, returning back to it. Then one can ask a question whether China and Russia have their right for zones of influence. For example, Russia thinks that their zone of influence is not even the countries that were part of USSR, but the countries that border the countries that were part of USSR. And here, one thing is to consider that, to think so. The other is to be able to realize it. I do not think there was any pre-agreement with Maduro. Same thing, it didn't work with Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, because if there was any agreement, Maduro would have flown to the United States himself. Well, Alexei, we are observing a lot of publications in different media saying that he was taken when he was sleeping, that some publications mention that maybe some ribs of his wife suffered during the capture. It just looks very picture-like, that he was caught while he was sleeping. There's some helicopters flying freely over Caracas, special forces landing on the roof of his buildings. And he woke up, he ran to his bunker, grasped the handle to go down, and they caught him at the last moment. And Trump mentions that they had special blowtorches to extract him if he succeeded in locking himself up. Well, one can ask that a few hours before that, they were Chinese, before the capture. Perhaps there was a discussion, and maybe they conveyed a message: Maduro, do not misbehave, you'll be alive, they will capture you. And China is already saying that we'll be able to provide his security, if anything, and you can come back to us. So maybe it's some sort of an operation agreed between the parties. All right, Alexander, but if he ends up being executed? Okay, Alexei. In 27, the legal process will go full steam, right? That's when the court proceedings will actually happen. There are some American lawyers ready to practice their skills in this process. One position is that he is illegitimate in the court because he is a president of a foreign country, and everything may take a long time, and Trump, in his another negotiation with China, might actually trade Maduro for something. Well, look, the things with Gaddafi lasted for quite a few years, and you know how it ended. With Hussein, it lasted for 20 years, and you know how it ended. So time frame is not really a big factor here. What can be a factor, I think, is that if China attacks Taiwan and the United States do not intervene, that might be an indicator. But Venezuela is not an adequate exchange for Taiwan. Although it depends how you look at it. They have big reserves of oil and some other minerals. Life will show. But what's important here is that Russia and China are kicked out of Venezuela. And that Trump is getting a very strong lever to affect the oil market of this planet, including the countries of OPEC, because those are problematic relations. And that will take some time. It probably will be a year, year and a half for American industries, oil industry, to rebuild what was already crumbling in Venezuela. And I don't think that can be explained with any pre-agreements, because there is no adequate exchange that Russia and China can get for letting America take Venezuela and building a specific big red lever that they can use to affect the markets of the world. Well, then, Alexei, if this is a game, it is a move made by Trump, we actually observed somebody in the betting universe, somebody placed $37,000 on a bet that China will invade Taiwan this year. So they're saying that China is going to get Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, and the United States are getting Venezuela. Okay, Alexander, but how can one realize that practically? Speaking of Taiwan, America recently supplied $11 billion worth of weapons to Taiwan. Is that also a contractual agreement between states and China? How does that play into that worldview? Because that is adding thousands of more potentially dead Chinese soldiers attacking Taiwan, just that deal, because America is supplying strong defenses. So this doesn't really fit into this mold. $11 billion weapons deal doesn't fit into any pre-agreement with China. Putin physically cannot take Ukraine the way he wanted to. He was given Ukraine by Biden administration basically a long time ago. Remember when Putin was invading? We in Ukraine had, 4 javelins and poorly shooting Stingers at that time. That was all the help we had from states. Ukraine basically was fending off Russia till the end of May, but realistically more till September from February, so for half a year, just with whatever we had in our stashes. All these NLAWs and other weapons supplied, NLAWs were supplied with weak accumulators. Their batteries were out of date. They were supplied to us most of them were over 9 years old, and 9 years is a threshold when an accumulator dies. So our inventors had to figure out how to use small moped accumulators, batteries, or some other ones to power them up for a shot. So Ukraine was basically given. It just disagreed with that. You can look at the publications of American ambassador. What did they say before leaving? How CIA director visited Moscow, probably discussing the rules of capture of Ukraine by Russia. Putin just failed to take it because the Ukraine is a huge thing to swallow. And it's only some guys like Portnikov can state that Russia can consume the whole Ukraine. They may aspire to, but physically it's unsolvable task for them. Even if we do not get any more cent of supplies or bullet from our allies, Russia will not have enough resources to capture it, or even if Ukraine somehow surrenders, they will not have enough administrative resources to manage it. Because look, just for the last year, they spent over 120 billion rubles on the captured territories and Donbass, and they are not even noticeable. They built a few buildings in Mariupol and Donbass, and that's it. You don't see where the money was spent. This is a colossal black hole, and I would say even if I wanted to weaken Russia, I would give Ukraine to Russia if I was Trump, because that stone would sink them with a very high reliability in a very small puddle. But nobody can play like that, and they're not going to. And I do not believe in agreements like that. Nobody can come out and say, let's exchange Taiwan for Venezuela or Ukraine. Because if anybody leaks that piece of information, that'll be a huge scandal. Because presidents are being listened to by a lot of people. Their guards, their wives, their service people, translators, a bunch of people around this process. So that would be a full catastrophe for them. Alexey, we could then be studying it as a Munich agreement in history. No, that would be a catastrophe. I do not believe in that. Okay, so here we can talk about Russian billions in the new occupied territories. They do have a couple projects about building railroad and automobile road connecting Crimea with the southern territories. So they do have where to invest these monies. Sure, yeah, there are plans, there are projects, but where do you take this money? 120 billion rubles, that's a big amount for them. They are trying to threaten everybody with a nuclear war when their 200 billion are being captured by Europe of the assets. So that's a lot of money. They'll just go bankrupt if they really will proceed with all these projects in the occupied territories. And if Ukraine will just provide a minimum of resilience, not even any CIA or special agents blowing up the stations and people in vehicles, no, just people ignoring the orders, leaving to different parts of the country, depopulating the area, misbehaving in terms of not following orders. Alexey, are you talking about Ukraine, perchance? Well, right. But yeah, for Russia, just these 4 districts they want to occupy, if they ever succeed, will be very problematic to manage. And I think they do understand that. So I do not believe in such an exchange. I can give it maybe a couple % for such a deal, territorial international deal, but I am very skeptical of any pre-agreements. I've seen how the international politics are made, and everything is way more primitive than you can even imagine. Pre-agreement is a multi-step thing. In politics, it's very difficult to conduct even a 2-step operation. To be successful in a 2-step operation, you have a very strong team, very well-functioning, oiled political machine to figure out how to, and to make sure that 2-step schema works. But 3-step, forget about it. Exchange like that, multi-step conspiracy, trade of one territory for another, that's only in the beliefs of conspiracy theorists somewhere in Russia. Okay, Alexey, let's go to inner politics and some Russian things. But before we do that, let's conclude the matter with Maduro. One can say that this is a completely illegal operation, or lawless, rather. What do you mean? They did what they could. He has powers, Trump has powers, and he used them against the legitimate target for him. Well, it kind of just looked like a little funny. Maduro in this sports suit, now football players in Europe putting on this sports suit, showing off, saying, hey, we are rich too, we can wear that. Now, okay, America got Maduro and they're following with this noise. Europe is very mum. Europe is very quiet and they're not doing anything in this regard, except for some media screaming bloody murder. And more data comes out that Brits didn't know that this operation was underway. So you can probably imagine how the coalition of the willing for Ukraine is looking like a kid put back in a corner. Well, Alexander, Europe is thinking about another problem. They're thinking about what will happen if a similar operation in some capacity will be conducted against Greenland. And America is aimed at acquiring this territory one way or the other. And like the Prime Minister of Denmark said, that we need to treat Trump's threats very realistically. And she would not put this statement without believing it. But this would mean the end of NATO. And what will happen with Europe if NATO collapses? Well, then it probably will start with one NATO member taking territory of another NATO member, one that is much bigger and stronger, that can just do it. And EU will not really have any chances to fight America off Greenland. So Europe has a ton of things to think about. But whether condemn or not condemn, that's another thing. Now, American politicians are probably very inspired by recent events, and you can only imagine what they might answer to Europeans if they express any protestations. And there may be consequences to that. So Europe is sitting quiet, thinking it over, and I think this is a good sign that there is no prearranged deal here. That they're really concerned, what if we will be affected in the same fashion somehow, or maybe our proxy interests will be affected in this matter. So they're all puzzled, and they're all actively thinking. And the United States have prepared enough and starting to realize their Monroe Doctrine. So from the military standpoint, how would you estimate this, what's happening in Venezuela? Well, for that, you would need to know more details, Alexander. I'm sure we're being given maybe 5% of what really happened. What we can say is that there likely was a group that was tracking him, and if Vice President is now the head of administration in Venezuela, and she declared the force majeure in the country, and one can say some of the actions are leading to believe that maybe there were discussions with her previously or some powers around her, and the fact that Maduro had some bodyguards from Cuba, that might be an indicator that he is not really trusting his own forces. So there might have been some discussions as to possibly inheriting his power after. His Minister of Defense is making some scary noises, but yeah, that's at this point is pointless. Remember when the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, how many Iraqi generals were purchased? At least a couple dozen. And that's normal modus operandi for the West. They never go relying on luck. They usually organize and plan their activities, their events, operations. And I can give 3 characteristics to NATO and Western operations. 1, they're saying none of our soldiers died. And the main conclusion that was made by the chief of military in the United States, the head of chiefs of staff, he is saying that we have shown that our technical and organizational advantage is indisputable. And this is their basic element of pride, because Western armies work only and then when their technical and organizational advantage is inarguable. If they do not have that, they very likely will not even conduct the operation unless this is a exclusive situation. So when people are screaming that Trump showed Putin how to conduct military operations, I want to say that Trump and Putin are very different models of warfighting. It was much more difficult for Putin to agree to his military operation because between the United States and Venezuela, the difference between Venezuelan army and American army, United States army, is huge. US army is 5+ level, Venezuela is probably 3-. And Russia had no advantage over Ukraine, except for numeral. Qualitatively, Russia was not any way better than Ukrainian army. And that's why everything is so slow and bloody. And that's why it was much more difficult for Putin to make a decision, unlike Trump. So here one can laugh at Putin, but then I would ask why between the laughs you're writing other posts saying that if you do not stop him, he will win, right? And you can also think that Putin went to that war of his life, one can say, without having much chances for success. He even has lost the first part of the invasion and then eventually gathered his will together and resources together and is slowly grinding by willpower and resources the front in Ukraine. And it's 300 times more difficult and bloody than what Trump has done in Venezuela. And one thing is lending your special forces on the rooftops in Caracas, knowing that you can trace most of people because there were special trackers placed in their things. That's a whole other level of operation. Versus when you throw Russian army to, say, Gostomel airport near Kiev, and despite the promises and some network like Medvedchuk saying that everybody will be greeting you with flowers, Mr. Putin, this was a much more risky operation, and that's why it's difficult to compare. That's why one can say that they're somewhat alike in regards to the way these operations treat the international law. All these arguments about the international law make me giggle and leave the room, because politics is always upstream from law. Politics is the thing determining the international law. And to reference a political action, a capture of a president of a neighbor country, is a political action, and trying to explain that with the international law, this is not even putting the carriage in front of the horse. This is total misunderstanding of how things work. So these two operations, politically, they are somewhat similar. There are some similarities, but technically, they are absolutely incomparable. They're very different. Russian model, Putin's model, implies a fight against the enemy, even if the enemy is exceeding it in capabilities and numbers. Russia is historically ready to fight whoever attacks it or whatever threat they see, regardless of calculations. In the West, the concept is different. Remember Chamberlain, who was appeasing Hitler, giving Britain time to prepare for this looming conflict. He is, in my opinion, a misunderstood figure. He was buying time for Britain. And that's why the West will fight only in the extraordinary circumstances when there is no other option. In my view, the capture of Maduro is, I'm trying to compare it with, it's as if Ukrainian special SWAT unit would have captured a director of kindergarten. That's my comparison. And for Putin, comparing that operation with Putin's war, that would be military Spetsnaz fighting with that same SWAT unit. That's why what we're seeing in Ukraine is different. So I understand that it's difficult for people to love their enemies, but that's for the strong ones. For the weak ones, at least, do not imagine stories that do not exist, and do not spread rumors, do not smear everybody with claims. All right, Alexey, there are other things now appealing to Zelensky, and some people are saying, oh, Zelensky, you saw what happened to Maduro. You'd better behave with Trump. I want to look at it from a different angle, though. It is Orthodox Christmas, the night before Christmas. And in Europe, as it was told, Kushner and Witkoff will be participating in the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, the heads of states. And before this meeting, there were different statements made, from somewhat funny, like Zelensky is saying Trump wants to increase the average pay in Ukraine threefold, to very weird ones, that without any mandate, French and British troops, if there'll be any agreement about ceasefire, that Britain and France might send their troops to Ukraine's territory. Many people are laughing at this, and they're saying that no negotiations. Russia is changing the terms and positions according to recent statements, and they've done it on the backdrop of the recent scandal with the Ukrainian drones attacking Special Command Center and Putin's residence in the same complex. So some people are saying, let's just bury these peace tracks. Are you burying them? What's your take on the vector of this situation? Well, I'm not burying the peace process. Russia actually is somewhat muffling their anger about the drones attacking their special bases. They communicated with Vitkov and they came to some agreement. But as for discussing and some people saying that it's unacceptable for Russia that European troops will be in Ukraine, that's laughable in my view, because if you see, for example, Turkish troops in Ukraine, there definitely was some agreement with Russia. I will tell you more. The troops in Ukraine will be mostly not to stop Russia from invading, but to prevent civil war breaking out in Ukraine. That'll be against Ukrainian insurgencies rather than external threats. So like in Bosnia, Europe had done, placing some of the European troops. And I think they do understand the difficulty of situation where you have 1.5 million automatic rifles with the population and about 1 million of these population with military experience. So nobody will just put it this way, and nobody will say that this is for pacifying and keeping situation controlled in Ukraine, and it will be dressed as if to prevent Putin, to be peacekeepers against Putin's invasion. But the real purpose of these troops is different. And that's why I'm saying that, no, it's not an issue. French troops, British troops, Turkish troops could be seen in Ukraine. And Zelensky even, or one of the congressmen, maybe Stefanishin, made a statement that by the end of February, they will have new updated laws for election to hold this year. And if you consider that to be correct, then perhaps by the end of February, they will be at some agreement point about elections in Ukraine. And if they were screaming disagreements, as we're being told by some media channels, about Donbass, about nuclear stations in the south, then no agreements, no discussions of that caliber would be happening. So these are mutual things that are being discussed. For example, Ukraine's agreement to give some part of nuclear energy to Russia in exchange for presence of EU troops in the country. That's all negotiable. And I think Zelensky understands the value of it too. But let's say if you have about 10 to 15,000 foreign troops being at the electoral outposts, electoral campaign posts, it likely will guarantee a much smoother process than if they would not be there. Because one needs to understand that there are a lot of precursors to a civil war in Ukraine. Because it's not about good people loving Bulgakov literature versus bad people who do not love Bulgakov. It is, for example, a combination of Beletsky and Budanov as one group of power persons, power agencies against Zaluzhny and cadre military around him, because only dumb and blind would not understand that coalition of Beletsky and Budanov are very friendly to each other, and they have issues with Zaluzhny and his supporters. One can see how the Third Corps is conducting their operations and how they force cadre officers to unite against Budanov and Beletsky and support Zaluzhny. That's why Zelensky is working actually that theory of using different agencies, different power centers to fight each other. He is rather successful in doing it. And also, if you believe some independent polling in the country, since last year, there have been a significant trend for losing the percentage of support by military as future presidential figures. It touches even Zaluzhny because he was, I think, 36, and according to the recent one, he's only 29. Recent polling, don't ask me where it comes from, Zelensky only has about 20%, Zaluzhny has 22%, and independent centrist candidate would have 24%. What does it show is that people are ready to accept maybe 40%, even among the Congress representing by military officers, and 40% is acceptable, but they do not want to see a military figure as a president. They, I think, start to understand that supreme leader also determines the foreign policies, and if it'll be a military person, it likely will mean continuation of war in one way or the other. That's why these people will be fighting for the presidential position and for competition and their support in the Congress. Now, I have a question to post. When some heroes of Ukraine will be very tempted to throw a grenade, shoot, or launch a UAV into the other hero of Ukraine, and when they will start doing it, what would French, British, and Turkish patrols who are positioned next to election campaign outlets, election posts, how will they affect the situation, right? Because probably throwing a grenade at the Allied troops is not a good idea, and they somehow likely will stabilize the process. And also, I want to underscore here that the presence of troops is also additional lever for Europe to monitor that Ukraine is following its obligations, because years of negotiations before that have shown to Europe that Ukrainian heroes are very prone to not following the agreements or rules that they have agreed to some time before. So the observers, these allied troops present in Ukraine, will be not only to deter Russia from further attacks, but also, and probably mostly, to prevent issues within Ukraine. And now, do you think Russia would be interested in allowing such influence to happen, logically? Alexey, I want to say here that maybe people will spin it saying that, oh, that's another way to tell Russians that, listen, you've been had again. Look, there is NATO in Ukraine. Well, it'll be presented in Ukraine and officially as here we are saving Ukraine from Russia. But if you're a realist, what can 10 or 15,000 troops do to stop Russia? Nothing. Even 50,000 is nothing. 150, 200,000, now we're talking. That would be a significant force. All these smaller numbers, they're maybe barely enough to make sure that the elections would be done legally and honestly, because Europe also understands that they cannot trust Ukraine. And recent story with the drones attacking Putin's residence is also a stone to that target. Alexey, why did Zelensky bring Budanov so close to power? What other options did he have, Alexander? He needs the head of the office. He needs to prepare for elections and other things. Well, a couple of weeks ago, he was saying that I'll work with the agencies. I don't need any persons. Well, that was done as the cover, Alexander. He would rather work with the vertical, with a select few people. If you look at his inner circle, Maria Levchenko, the secretary of president from back of his days in the comedy club, an absolutely trusted person by him. Her husband, Tigilashvili, who was seen with Budanov, who actually lobbied Budanov's appointment. And there was a scandal when he and Budanov were noticed at the house of one Russian gray economic figure. I think Tkach, as a journalist, brought the story up. And when the deputy minister of police was by press for some corrupt schemes he was allegedly participating in, Budanov took him as his second and gave him the military status of lieutenant colonel. So what Zelensky is relying upon, he is relying upon the inner circle a lot, always. Look, all these motions of Shmygal and Fedorov and Maluk and the other RDS figures, this shows you that in this brothel there are not even a dozen of beds that you can rearrange. He has maybe 6 beds left, and he's trying to organize these 6 poorly effective managers to get some use out of them. The story of Shmygal is already quite a story, right? People were laughing that he should have been very good fit for Venezuela. And another joke, right? Alexander says that if you want to read something dramatic, you can read his resume. Even Kuleba was mentioned today. Kuleba, who already said a lot of things about Zelensky, about Ukrainian politics, that we will lose this conflict if we continue this way, that the next offers on the table will be worse than what we had before, and yet they're still trying to poach him for taking some position. So they're already concentrating the concentrated power in a small group of people. Zelensky maybe has 8 people, 10 people he can rely upon among the whole vertical. So why did Budanov agree to that? That's almost like signing a political death accord for himself. Oh no, he sees it different. One needs to understand what Budanov is. Budanov has his own views and aspirations to the position of the president. Not because of the last factor, his being his people who surround him, who support him. And there could be Valery Kondratyuk and some other people behind them. I think Beletsky and Budanov already have figured that Zelensky is gone politically very soon. And it's the situation when you don't know whether these are bodyguards or a convoy. And when is the moment when your bodyguards turn on you? So Beletsky and Budanov are fighting their own game, and Zelensky is trying to use them against Zaluzhny to basically hope that each of them will sink enough, while they all think that they can sink Zelensky enough and maybe take a position when it presents open. And this is ideation that they've been walking towards. Some of them were since 2020. Yermak is out of the picture to a degree now, so now they're getting Budanov and Beletsky up. And frankly, Budanov's people surrounding Zelensky, they are more of a convoy than a bodyguard. And I want to remind you the story of Pinochet. Pinochet, who took over Allende, half a year before that, there was another attempt at coup, but that was not done by Allende's friends. And Pinochet came and said that, hey, there is a coup against you, and he helped to squabble the first one. It was very quick. There were no tanks on the street. There were a dozen officers arrested, and that was it. And when half a year later, there was another coup in the works, and Allende was given materials, KGB were telling him that you have your own people working against you. He was telling them that, hey, you're idiots. If he wanted to topple me, he could have done it half a year ago with the other idiots. But he was the one who helped me to get rid of the previous coup. And even when he got all the materials proving that Pinochet is working against him, Pinochet just said, hey, I'm telling them that I work against you, but I'm a double agent, I'm actually working for you. And that's a usual strategy. You can find that in all the CIAs and KGBs of the world. And of course, that's what Budanov and Beletsky are telling Zelensky, that we will save you from Nabu, we will save you from the allies, we will save you from all the other things. We have the power, the forces, and you will be much safer with us. But Zelensky is also not the first day on this planet, and he is also intriguing against them. So you will see by the way he brings more people and how he positions one against the other, that he's got some steam to run on as well. But everybody is getting ready for huge changes during the post-war period. And many see that as their lucky card, as their future when it will start unfolding. And I want to say that even more than Budanov and Beletsky, Budanov may see Beletsky as a friend, as an ally, but Beletsky also has his own plans and aspirations. So they might eventually have a falling out between themselves. I know this company to a degree, and I want once again to underscore that Zelensky is playing the game of having those chained dogs close to himself who will be squabbling against each other and who will be helping him to defeat his enemies. The ideation of Budanov is to topple Zelensky at the right moment. The aspirations that Beletsky has is to either topple Budanov later or use him as the train to propel himself into the circles of power. The main question is, what is the idea that Zaluzhny harbors? But he's playing a very good Chinese stratagem to never acknowledge anything until it happens, which is rather wise. So he's staying quiet about all of that. Look, all of that has the backstage, and French troops, Turkish troops, British troops they'll be hopefully holding the stage. All of the power figures in Ukrainian politics, they went there for certain aspirations. Many of them want to and do see themselves as president. And that's why all these people will try probably to follow the funny people saying that two sudden turns and suddenly it is you who are being head. They'll probably try to follow this schema. So, Alexey, would you agree with the statement that Zelensky's power will be weakening in the practical meaning of this word, and American influence will be taking over the British influence? Look, Alexander, there is an opinion that humans are the descendants from monkeys, but quoting professionals, humans are monkeys. Just a very special branch of the monkey evolution. So the key here is that, to answer your question, I would say whether Zelensky's power will get weaker, it is weakened already. Otherwise, there would not be all that reshuffling happening. We would not be observing that. If his power would not be weak, he would not need to exchange Yermak for somebody, especially for Budanov. So he already has a diminishing circle of people around him. And if Ukrainians who still support Ukraine's victory over Putin for the country, if they could make a step away from this situation, they would probably not find anything more comedic than the resumes and the life vectors of Kuleba, Maluk, and Shmygal. Look, a 40 million worth country fails in a critical moment for the country, cannot present a couple dozen bright figures who are capable to carry this country over the abyss. And all our choice is 5 very wicked persons. So this is an indicator that Zelensky's power is not weak, just weak. It's like if you're trying to keep the tooth that is completely decayed and missing most of it, and you're trying to still cement what's left. And why do you think that Budanov is an influence of the United States? Well, the publications in Ukraine are saying that Budanov went to the United States, was not taking pictures, maybe met with some people in the military or CIA. Well, Budanov has some connections in the military of the United States, but not with the CIA. And I can tell you that CIA actually did ask, with materials and proof, did ask Zelensky to remove Budanov from the position that he was occupying. And Zelensky almost made this decision twice. So all these stories that Budanov has very good relations with the United States. One wants to ask here, remember the Civil War, the movie? When some people go in a car being stopped by a soldier, yelling at him, "Hey, we are Americans." And he asks them, what kind of Americans you are? Americans are very different. I can also say that I have very good relations with Americans, especially with the owner of neighbor hot dog stand. I love to talk to the guy about life and things. So my friends, and understand, my opinion is just an opinion of the downed pilot. I want to say that just for entertainment, consider different scenarios, not what is being fed to you by our media in Ukraine. And the most upsetting for me is how very for sale all this supposed to be people of power in Ukraine are. Budanov's appointment yesterday with all the owners and stuff, that he's likely friends with Americans, that there'll be a peace trend now. This nation of warriors of light, as they're presenting themselves, are like in the other movie, remember? These are people. No, these are not people. These are much worse. They are the best people of the city. So that's what they are. Yermak was their shining star 2 days ago. Now Budanov, and he's getting all these praise and everything. All our doctors of economic sciences, our leading bloggers, our leading social figures in the media. They're all now telling stories that even kindergarten kids would not believe. And they're licking his shoes to such a degree that even during Bolshevik times, that didn't happen in regards to Stalin to such a degree. Alexey, I think Maluk is a great example of such a story. Usyk and the other people are coming out and supporting him, saying that Maluk cannot be replaced. Everybody's standing for him. No, he was replaced when the decision was made. Yeah, I'm curious about whether they'll stand the same way for the next wave, when the next wave of replacement comes. People are just eating the legends that are being fed from the TV marathon. The society at large does know who Maluk is and who really is the author of the successes that security services of Ukraine present as his achievements. I will not gonna say and name names now, but when the war is over, I will be able to do that. I just don't want to. Well, it's already known, right, Alexey? Well, no. But who says that Maluk was the organizer? There were other people organizing that. Alexey, we're fish, okay, in Ukraine. We're not the smallest fish, but we are seeing that Zelensky is giving Maluk an award for the spiderweb operation. And a couple of days ago, they're writing that Maluk should not be removed. He is preparing something else. And then later, it was presented that it was Khmara, who is now the second in command and who is appointed interim lead. Apparently it was him who was developing the spiderweb operation. Wait a second, if Khmara was the author and Maluk has got the hero of Ukraine, why is that? Oh, Alexander, I was about to tell you, if you dig deeper, it will not be Khmara either. And that's why I don't want to name names right now. But there is a very gentle thing there. We can despise or accuse people who are feeding us this information, who are inventing the legends that have no relation to reality. And people whom they put on pedestal very often are just corruptioneers and criminals. And when everything will come to light, they will probably be horrified. All those people whom they congratulate these days with their birthdays, all these heroes and commanders, all these heroes of Ukraine, many of them have very significant black spots on their biography. And you cannot blame people for that. They believe the legends because they don't have other sources. But there is another category. There is a category that have resources, money. They could have at least abstained from supporting these legends, but they are being very servile because they see some benefits for themselves, their businesses, their operations. There is, for example, a Casio club in Ukraine, the club of directors of companies. They very often had Sternenko and Budanov visiting their meetings, and they were always praised and supported. And while they're saying that they do worry about the destiny of the country, in reality, they very often worry more about providing the corruption support to their businesses, because good contacts with power that can help you build business very often cross that gray line of from being PR into being corruption. And it's just amazing for me to see these people of power being so servile. One friend of mine said, I spent 9 years trying to teach them some principled behavior with the responsibility that and resources they have on their shoulders. I was really upset when I saw how servile they are when they have access to power. And yeah, this is another group of people who are, and again, there is another degree here that some businessmen, at least, they're servile to a degree that it benefits their business. But there are others who are completely drowning in praise and praising the political figures who are doing it with such abandonment that you start to think, wait a second, what's happening with you? It reminds me of the 12 Moments of Spring movie when one of the Hitler's generals asked during the conversation at the last days of war, he's saying that stop making fools of people. There are so many fools around, I don't even know whom to talk anymore. You know, we all were afraid of tactical nuclear strike on Ukraine by Russia, but there are 20 PR nuclear strikes blowing up in the country, blowing the country apart every day. And it's so horrible to see how many leaders of public opinion, how brown noses they are and how deep they lick. And very often it's the same people who are praising both Budanov, Maluk and Zelensky without even understanding that the whole model of special forces, special ministries, special services is designed to be pitting military intel against the national security service. And yeah, majority of Ukrainians I cannot blame for lack of information. I'm trying to be that alternative information so they would at least see the situation from different angles. But the problem of the TV marathon that we have in Ukraine is that it creates a certain degree of village propaganda where there is one channel, right, that's very poorly broadcasted, that shows things that people do not like, that people know are false. Nobody believes that, but everybody is watching it and there is nothing else to watch. That same legendarium is there 24/7. That spiderweb operation, the operations in Crimea, the attacks on the bridge, real picture is different. And some group is propping themselves up with this propaganda, others are using it for their business, and the third are just afraid to believe that it is not so. They prefer to believe that just a little more and Russia will collapse and they will somehow magically prevail. But look, being ill-informed should not mean to be bootlicker, right? You should still be able to ask questions. Alexey, look, you are well-informed, right? You are the person with access, with resources, but you're not saying too much. You're holding some information. Let's discuss it this way. We have two major problems with the country, I think. It's not fools and roads. It's the drafting commission and energy. Well, Alexander, if you connect the drafting commission to the energy plant, they might actually generate more of what we're missing. So about the drafting commission, there was already a list published that there are 4 people killed, that the prosecution was done in secrecy, and there is a serious conflict brooding between the drafting commission and people of Ukraine. In Belgorod, the drafting commission were beaten on the street, and their body cams were burnt. So we're already in the phase of physical resistance. We discussed that back in 25 in our streams. And we also have issues with, for example, energy. Slovutich is sitting without energy, lines of people for basic services. And in Dnieper, Alena, the cooking oil facility was destroyed. And as it presented in Ukraine, well, hey, the civilian object, Russia is shooting up our civil objects. Well, it's understandable. One can say that we're hitting Russian oil because that's how they make money. They're hitting our oil, cooking oil production facilities because that's how we are making money. And in Ukraine, some sources are now trying to spin it that this production had some shares, some ownership by United States, some American enterprise in Dnieper, and as if it is some proxy war that Russia is waging against states again. So we have two trends. We have this internal civil war brooding, and we have the big hot war that we're fighting in the front. So this change of personnel in the presidential surroundings, we thought that Yermak will be vice president, and now perhaps Budanov will be there. How will these trends differ under this new cabinet? They won't really. Drafting Commission will be speeding up their trying to get their activities more effective, because if you're losing one township after another, it's difficult to have any success in negotiations. And the first trend is about the electricity. So electricity, it's difficult to completely shut down. As long as the nuclear power station is working, the power is flowing. And the real heroes of this war, I think, are Ukrainian energy specialists. They are managing to somehow divert the energy flow. And it usually, if you notice, it goes into a 10-day cycle. Russia strikes some energy targets, and then roughly about 48 hours after the attack, the townships start to get lights back. And there'll be more disconnects, but usually the energy comes back within a few days. And we're already in the middle of a very scary winter that was promised for us to be super horrible, that maybe we'll have to evacuate Kiev and other cities. Yes, it is rough. Yes, energy gets turned off for a while. Maybe some pipes will burst because of the frozen water heaters. But ballpark, we will survive that. And I think not much will change. With the same energy systems, we'll continue willy-nilly going more or less. And under Budanov, they will still continue drafting because we still need people on the front. There will be likely some changes in the military. Maybe Syrsky will get removed. It's interesting who will take his place. But these measures, if you see them, will likely precede the intensification of mobilization efforts. And we already saw some statements from the cabinet saying that we are trying to preserve our troops. We're trying to be more technological in our war fighting, and we heard these stories before. But speaking about preserving soldiers and emphasizing battle readiness and training, even Syrsky came out today with some support to that direction. What prevented him from doing it 5 years until now? But my point is that if they will replace these people, they likely will spin the story saying that, look, we now have more caring soldier officers in the army who care about soldiers. We have overwhelmed and prevailed over the Soviet traditions. And that's why we need to draft more people, because it's under a new structure. And that's why I'm thinking that the changes in the top brass are very likely. The first, why they didn't change it immediately, because they needed to stabilize the vertical of power first, and now that is getting more stabilized, we will be looking at replacements at the generals and top general tier. And that's when they will push for more mobilization. You shouldn't be afraid, dear Ukrainians. We are paying more on the contracts, and the country is still in danger, and we need you to help us defend it. How deep will they go in mobilization? Don't know yet. Hard to predict, but I give you 99% that they will be intensifying mobilization. End of the first hour.